Alright, as I said, this is going to be a little bit of a test, most likely. I'm probably going to try and go live more often than that, but we'll see how this goes. So, for those of you joining, this is Vassal of Christ from YouTube. Obviously, you probably got here from the link. I posted a poll that said which topic you wanted me to talk about. And actually, what somewhat surprised me was the Reconquista one pretty heavily. So the reason I had those four specific, I think it was the Reconquista, the 100 Years' War, Viking England, and Rome, was they're just some either essays I'd written for fun or for school, and I was gonna pretty much basically just read them and then, take brief pauses and give a little bit of brief analytics or analysis explanations. I got a little bit of this inspiration from Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. If anyone has ever read that or listened to that, it's a podcast. I don't know if he's actually active anymore, but just something fun I wanted to do. Probably going to go more live stream, either reading books or, articles, papers, stuff like that. And then just do analytics, maybe do some call-ins, some discussions, have some people ask questions about certain historical events, see if I can give any analysis or anything like that. So, again, this is just more of a test than anything. Probably going to just go straight into YouTube Live, but seeing as I just set up the YouTube live stream, you got to wait 24 hours before you can do live since I just set up the channel. I got to figure out, for a Zoomer, I'm not very tech savvy, so I've got to get some of my buddies to let me know how to do Discord to YouTube. That'll be better. Right now I'm just using a very vanilla software off my computer. I'm going to save the audio file and then upload it to YouTube. So even if that works, it's probably going to be complete garbage, so just work with me here. But enough blathering. So yeah, this Reconquista series, bear with me again. I'm actually doing a stream with Trad Patrick tonight, so it is a little abbreviated. It's kind of fortuitous you guys picked this one because I think there's only 9 pages worth of material as opposed to my 100-Year War series, which I'm probably going to do next, which is like 15, 20 pages worth of material. So a lot more to break down there. I'm a little bit more passionate about it, obviously, but and if anybody knows, I've subscribed to Demetrios Press in the past, or knows the Twitter account Yale, one of the many incarnations he's had. I've actually streamed this on his, I did a video recording of me just simply reading this on his online site, and I also got it published. Each one of these articles was published in his paper, so anyone that's been following me around or for following him around, this is nothing new, but my analysis hopefully will be, if I can offer, much more than merely criticism of, what is essentially 2 years old of an article here that I wrote, so bear with me, please. Okay, so part 1 of the Reconquista series. So part 1, obviously, is the Muslim horde descends and the Christians battle back. So, our story begins in the early 8th century, and Muslim forces begin raids against Christian Iberia from recently conquered territories in North Africa. Roughly the year 710, these raids consolidated into a much larger invasion force that lands across the Straits of Gibraltar and begin a campaign headquartered in, pardon my Spanish, Cartagena or Carthago Nova. It was known deeper in antiquity. Obviously, this is southeast Spain, I believe. So the Iberian Peninsula, prior to this invasion, was racked, and obviously subsequently during the invasion, was racked with turmoil and could be seen as a prime target. The Visigoth king Roderick was, by many accounts, combating Basques in the northwestern part of the country, I believe. and had to hurry south to deal with the invasions. Other accounts detail that there was further internal struggles, and that even Byzantine forces were fought in an expedition to reclaim Hispania for the empire. Although generally accounts vary on precisely where and when the decisive battle of this campaign was fought, chroniclers agree it was around 711 and 712 before the fall of the Visigoth capital of Toledo. In this battle, known by many names but hereto referred to as the Battle of Guadalete, the Muslim forces used their signature light cavalry tactics and Berber horsemen, that is, North African horsemen, to outmaneuver the clumsy formations of the Visigoths. Obviously, if you know anything about the Goths, the Visigoths, kind of Germanic warriors, favored like a shield wall, more heavier infantry formations. So Roderic's host was plagued by duplicity and betrayal, and a wing of his cavalry did not even join the battle, allowing Muslim forces to roll up the Visigoth line and put them to flight. So Roderic's not a very popular guy, and some of his noblemen, mostly cavalry wing, as you know, if you know anything about antiquity, and even Middle Ages, the cavalry wing was more of a richer class of citizen or soldier, if you will, as before the standing armies. You didn't have a subsidized, basically your horse wasn't provided for you. So basically you had to be able to know how to ride and fight on horseback. So obviously a little wealthier people with a personal retinue that they could provide with horses. So basically anywhere from a junior to a major noble in this cavalry wing just said, the hell with this guy. And they didn't even join battle. Pretty low if you think about this in terms of a religious conflict, but hey. So it is hinted that more of Roderic's hosts intended to abandon and betray him, as he was an unpopular king who was said to have usurped his authority and been cruel and wicked. But they were too late to, and basically they were forced to fight for their lives, which is quite unfortunate. Roderick and a large quantity of the Christian nobility were slain, their force shattered, though the Muslims were said to have paid the price with nearly a quarter of their host. So, if you want to call it a Pyrrhic victory, you can call it a Pyrrhic victory, but Roderick, lied, cheating, stealing his way onto the throne, not a popular guy, soundly defeated by the Muslims, who, even though they lose a quarter of their force, hey, they've secured victory for themselves, and pretty much, as we'll see, most of the Iberia. With the success of the Muslim forces in this battle, more Moorish and Berber forces were arriving and continued the conquest of Iberia. Now, this is where things get interesting. Not going to win many PC points with this one. So, Jews, resentful under Christian rule, rallied to the Muslim cause and happily seized Christian territory and were given several Christian cities to govern and garrison, such as Seville, Toledo, and Cordoba. Cordoba will play if memory serves, Cordoba will play a fairly significant role later, but some recognizable cities there. Oh, there we go. This is important to note. Some 780 years later, when the Spanish Inquisition would start. So yeah. So for those of you who don't know, and I've written a paper on this before. I wrote it it was my final senior paper that I wrote in college as a history major. It was actually about the Spanish Inquisition. And as you can imagine, if you know anything about me, it's pretty much how it was. Torquemada and the Inquisition were pretty much justified in their actions. Rum check. Yeah, the reason the Inquisition mainly went after, I don't remember the Spanish term off the top of my head, I'd have to consult my paper, but it went after, I think it was conversos and something else. So basically, this is getting a little bit ahead of myself, and I might actually talk about this later in the stream, but the Christian forces allowed Muslims and Jews, after they won, to convert, and if they didn't, then they were ordered to be they were expelled from the country. So it was convert or leave. Obviously, you just fight a 780-year long war. you're not going to want the people that you beat hanging around, so that you give them a choice of join or go. So, the people that converted, potentially, there's the idea that maybe they, maybe they weren't sincere in their conversion, so the Inquisition was to root out Jews and Muslims that had made false conversions. So that's where I'm getting at with this. Again, a bit ahead of myself, but as you can see, 780 years of fighting these people when they basically sold you out or conquered your lands. Obviously, you're going to want to make sure that they're not around, basically to kick them out. Again, when you say not around, when you talk about certain classes, people will get all sorts of thoughts. Spanish Inquisition, over its, I believe it was nearly 300 years of its existence, I think, from almost 1500 to through the 19th century. I think it was like only a couple thousand people were actually executed, which, only a couple thousand, but when you compare it, that's over 300 years. A couple thousand people over 100 or 300 years, it's not a lot. Protestant sources and the Black Legend will tell you that it's millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people each year. Completely false. Just not the case. So, Spanish Inquisition, fairly humane for its time, but maybe I'll get into that at the end when they crop up again. But just so you know, an enemy, Jews and Muslims basically collaborated against Christians at the beginning stages of the Reconquista. So, Spanish Inquisition, long story short, was basically a way to make sure that they either converted or got out, because the Spanish just didn't want them in their country. It's that whole idea of, we're not really gonna, massacre you, but we're just gonna say, leave, leave. We won. Either join us, and make our country great again, or get out. So that's what I got to say about that for now. All right, so historians of the age knew the reasons for the Visigoths' historians of the age knew the reason for the Visigoths' utter defeat and downfall, decadence, and lack of penance. So it was very interesting that the contemporary historians blame that. They don't blame, anything other than the fact that the Visigoths basically got content, and they turned away from God, and they didn't repent of it, and basically a scourge came in the form of these Muslim hordes, and they were defeated. They knew Spain deserved its fate for their disgusting sins. Only the Basques and the kingdom of Asturias remained unconquered by the Mohammedan forces. Many towns in Iberia peacefully submitted to Islamic conquest in hopes that their lives and homes might be spared. The Islamic rule, though present for the better part of a millennium, began to recede in Iberia barely 10 years after the conquest, and the expansion in Western Europe would be checked a decade after that by Charles Martel at the Battle of Tours in 732, a battle discussed elsewhere on this site. Elsewhere on this site? I'm not sure what that means. I wrote it down, but, I'll just... Oh, hold on. Let's see if I talk about it, or if I need to talk about this now. Yeah, I do need to talk about this now. Okay, so... the Battle of Tours. So, a little recap. Charles Martel, as you know, Charles the Hammer. At the time, I don't believe he was the king of the Franks, but he eventually founded the Merovingian dynasty, which was, of course, the precursor of the Carolingian dynasty of Charlemagne. So, Charles Martellus, basically, the Muslims pretty enamored by their victory in Spain. Sorry, I just got a DM about recording. So, enamored by their victory, they tried to cross the Pyrenees, and basically, long story short, the Franks just utterly crushed them. And so they made no major attempts to cross the Pyrenees, even though Charlemagne and several other Frankish kings would try counterattack. But again, I guess what I wrote is pretty true. It's something we can discuss for another time. Basically, Charles Martel, held the ground, prevented the Muslims from overwhelming Europe. The Berbers had the mountainous regions of Spain, while the Arabs had the gentler terrain, but conflict over rule and culture gradually emerged amongst Muslim factions. The aforementioned Kingdom of Asturias was formed when a Visigoth band under Pelagius united and refused to pay the jizya, Jizya, jizya tax on non-Muslims, and expelled the regional governor, establishing a Christian refuge in northwest Iberia. So if anyone knows anything, I think it's fairly... It kind of ebbs and flows. The jizya tax is like basically paying... You have to pay for the privilege of being a non-Muslim in a Muslim country. I think there was like some Ottoman guy. He said like basically the idea of the tax. He's like, we don't want to like force anyone to convert or kill them or anything. He's like, basically like this tax is gonna like pay for the splendor of like the Islamic faith, which in turn will cause infidels to convert. So I believe, like, if I could be wrong, but I believe that was like the idea behind it. I also think that if you didn't pay it, the penalty was like death or something. So but we could go and haul into religion and politics later. But basically, yeah, like I could be wrong. Someone will probably comment on the video. I'm sure there'll be a ton of comments like this sucks or you got it all wrong, but whatever, I just did a limited amount of research for fun, basically, so deal with it. The kingdom was deemed... Okay, so talking about the Kingdom of Asturias. The kingdom was deemed inconsequential to the Muslims in Cordoba, so little effort was made to seize the land back initially, and it endured. Following a Muslim defeat at the hands of Odo of Aquitaine in 721 at the Battle of Toulouse, the Mohammedan forces were wary of returning without news of victory and success. Huh. Interesting. Okay, so this is completely forgot about this. So this is a Odo of Aquitaine. Obviously, if you know anything about regions in France, obviously this is a Frankish guy that defeated, and Toulouse obviously is a French city. So obviously they tried before the Battle of Tours. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So basically, in this campaign, they tried one time prior and got turned back by Odo of Aquitaine. I'm sure not in like the crushing defeat that Tours was, but still. And so the Mohammedan forces were wary of returning without news of victory and success, this defeat being a major setback. So the forces decided that Asturias would be easy pickings and set off to crush the rebellion and save face. The Muslim force enlisted the Bishop of Seville to broker an end to the rebellion, but to no avail. Interesting. One of the church fathers, I think it's attributed to John Chrysostom, St. John Chrysostom, but I'm not sure if it's an authentic quote or not. But the idea that the road to hell is paved with the bones of priests and the skulls of bishops. This might be one of them, this guy that's basically saying, lay down your arms, Christian brethren, submit to an infidel. Well, I'll let the theologians debate that one. Just food for thought. Pelagius drew his forces into a narrow valley at Covadonga. Again, sorry for the pronunciation. Covadonga. Covadonga? We'll go with that. A host that, by many accounts, was as small as 300 men. Sound familiar? Yes. Many people know that the Battle of Thermopylae, a host of Spartans and other Greeks of similar numbers, used the terrain to withstand a numerically superior foe. Of course, we hear the number 300 Spartans bandied about, but of course there were several thousand Greeks from varying city-states, but, irrelevant. They held off a vastly superior force. This was again the case. The Muslims attacked, but their numbers were blunted by the narrow front. With the high ground, the Christians bombarded the attackers with arrows and stones, and then Pelagius led a counterattack with hidden soldiers and killed many of the Muslims, including their commander. Upon hearing of the victory, uprisings erupted around Asturias, villagers grabbing weapons and slaying hundreds of the retreating Muslim soldiers. The governor whom Pelagius had exiled organized another force from the survivors of Covadonga and elsewhere met Pelagius in modern-day Proaza. Pelagius' forces were now bolstered by the other peoples of Asturias, and he triumphed once again over the Muslims, and again slaying the Muslim commander. Apologize if the mic's picking up my daughter. She's trying to get to sleep, and you can hear her crying. My wife, working diligently. God bless them both. But just, bear with me. I'm a rookie at this. Anyway, yeah, so basically you see this as like a grassroots movement. It's really odd to me. It just seems like the Muslim attempt at quelling this rebellion just doesn't seem all that serious. And then just to be defeated by basically peasants, essentially, and just this like spontaneous uprising. So he triumphed again, slaying the Muslim commander again. Okay. So although the Emirate of Cordoba dismissed this upstart kingdom, this marked the beginning of the Reconquista. So even after they couldn't quite, during their initial conquest, either they ignored it or they weren't able to capture it initially, they just said, "The hell with them. We'll leave them be. We got most of what we wanted." And then, after they fail to invade Francia, they say, "You know what? Let's try and get this upstart kingdom." And they just never seem like they're really serious about it. And even after this force is utterly wiped out, the local governor is killed, the commander, multiple commanders of the Muslim forces are killed. It seems like hundreds of them are put to flight, are put to the sword. Again, the Emirate of Cordoba dismisses the quote-unquote upstart kingdom that marked this, and this marks the beginning of the Reconquista and the eventual triumph of Christianity in Spain and Portugal over Islam. So Covadonga was the turning point from the disaster at Guadalete again, and crusades and warfare would rage across Iberia to cast out the invaders. Our shrine of the Lady of Covadonga stands as a testament to the battle, where Pelagius prayed for the intercession of the Blessed Virgin before the battle and was granted his heroic victory. So, pretty good start, apart from losing everything, you just got the intercession of the Blessed Virgin helps triumph. So that's the end of part 1, and I had, written it. It was like barely 3 pages. So I see we're only 20 minutes in. Can keep going. My plan was probably for about an hour-long video. We seem to be on pace. Again, you can probably hear my daughter in the background, but we'll just try and bear with it. Alright, so Reconquista Series Part 2. And this is going to be from 737 to 1095, which is pretty much like the beginning of Christianity's like major these 300 years or so going to be like the major gains by the Christians. Yeah, I can see my audio is definitely picking it up. Alright, hold on, bear with me. Alright, and I'm back. And I see that there's no gap in there, so basically I just had to go shut a door, because I could see that the audio was getting picked up. But again, this is rough. Picked like probably my least, by the paper I'm least proud of. Shortest. You guys voted for it. Rookie to this. Not doing live, which I'm probably going to do in the future. Again, just bear with me. So, okay, but like I said, 737 to 1095, the beginning of Christianity's march. It's always interesting for me to think about what's going on concurrently. So basically during this time you have when, England is fighting off Viking invaders for this, basically from this time period, 737 to 1095 is essentially like the amount of time that the Saxon Englands, or the Saxon English, are dealing with Viking invasions and then subsequent Norman conquest. Obviously, in Francia, you have the Merovingian and subsequent Carolingian dynasties. Obviously, the East-West Schism emerges at this point. What else you got? I think the pornocracy in Rome, and that's a subject for another time. Maybe the beginnings of the investiture controversy. I could be wrong on that one. But anyway, yeah, so just think about some of these things that are happening concurrently. So, it can give you a good idea of how, you know, minor technological changes will be happening. That might be more of addressed in the next chapter of this saga, if you will. All right, but we'll continue. So Pelagius' rebellion was far from a traumatic blow to the Muslim caliphate in Iberia. Muslim sources barely make mention of it, really. And it was overshadowed by their colossal defeat at Toulouse by Odo of Aquitaine, which we mentioned before. Like many significant Christian victories in history, such as Lepanto or Vienna, obviously Lepanto being the naval battle in which Don Juan of Austria defeated the Ottoman Turks in a naval battle in the 16th century, I believe. Yeah, I believe it was the 16th century, attributed to Our Lady of Victory, Our Lady of the Rosary, where basically there was a Muslim invasion that was threatening Italy and other, you know, Mediterranean coastal areas, and there was a decisive victory by the outnumbered Christian forces, which basically was like a last stand. You know, had the Christians lost, it would have opened up Europe. But, you know, conversely, the Muslims depicted it as, you know, we lost a lot of guys, but we can replace it. You know, they could replace the losses, the Christians couldn't. Same thing, to a lesser degree, in the Battle of the Siege of Vienna in 1683. You know, obviously, famously, the winged hussars from Jan Sobieski of Poland rescuing the besieged Habsburg Austrians. Anyway, Muslim forces are far less affected in defeat than the Christians would have been, but Christian victory halted Muslim advance and preserved their own existence in the face of jihad. Obviously, in those three battles I just listed, this rings true. Pelagius' victory preserved the kingdom of Asturias, but it was not he who expanded it, but rather his descendants. In 737, Pelagius died, and his son Favila was apparently killed by a bear in a trial of courage after being elected king. You hate to see it. However, the dynasty would endure. You really hate to see that. My father started the Reconquista. How can I live up to his legacy? I know. I'll fight a bear. And it kills him, you know. Hate to see it. Pelagius' daughters would make advantageous political marriages to consolidate power, and King Alfonso I drove an army of Muslims out of Galicia during his reign, which was from 739 to 757, and rallied the area to the Christian cause. This area would eventually become the Kingdom of Leon, a significant area in Spanish history, as famed explorer Juan Ponce de Leon hailed from there, and he searched for the Fountain of Youth, and he took his name from the site. Wow, that sentence sucks. I'm sorry for my writing. I'll read it as written, and hopefully you see how I tried to edit that on the fly. But this is it as written. This area would eventually become Leon, a significant area in Spanish history, as famed explorer Juan Ponce de Leon, the famed explorer who searched for the Fountain of Youth, takes his name from the site. What utter tripe. That's what you get for writing without an editor, or really looking back over your work. But I digress. Of course, we know the Fountain of Youth, only God can grant eternal life, not this pagan water. Destroy this profane temple. Pirates check? Okay, I digress. Eventually, most of all northwest Iberia was back under Christian control, as the Muslims were focused on attacking the Franks, like we said last time. Battle of Tours and all that. Unable to take any holdings beyond the Pyrenees, thank you, Charles Martel, the Muslims finally decided to devote their attention to the Christian kingdoms expand in their absence. So yeah, taking advantage of the situation while the Muslims are gone, now they're turning their focus back. To their frustration, the Christian kingdoms were too solidified at this point, and the Muslims could make no lasting holdings in the new Christian lands. During the reign of Alfonso II, which was 791 through 842, so you can see this is very gradual, the Christian territory crept southward toward Lisbon. Their power and prestige increased both from formal recognition by Charlemagne, referenced before, the Carolingian dynasty, and by the Pope, and the discovery of bones of St. James the Greater in Spain during this time. Obviously, so people knowing the lore, the history, the religion. St. James the Greater, one of the original 12 apostles of Christ, landed in Iberia, which was, as we said, a holding of the Roman Empire during the time. So, very significant relics. I believe he is one of the patrons of Spain subsequently, but I could be wrong. Spanish listeners will know. They can correct me. Personally, and I believe I mentioned him, Saint Isidore, the laborer, one of them, the other. He's a patron. He's a Spanish saint. He is my confirmation saint. So I hold a little bit more personal connection to him. But I digress once more. Additionally, a little known to the average person, the Reconquista was greatly aided by the Frankish kingdoms, both directly and indirectly. Obviously, as we previously discussed, the Franks aided the upstart Christian kingdoms in Spain and Portugal through occupying Muslim attention in their lust for invasion and crushing each incursion in turn. Thank you, Odo. Thank you, Charles Martel. However, the Franks also made counterattacks across the Pyrenees. Oh, this is a good one. This is good. Despite various setbacks, including the Battle of Roncevaux Pass, this battle inspired the Song of Roland, which is a must-read for any lover of chivalry. Very good. It basically tells the story of one of Charlemagne's paladins who fights a rearguard action. It's good. I believe there's a version of it in Bullfinch's mythology, but you can find a translation online, I'm sure. Song of Roland. You should read it. Charlemagne and his Carolingian dynasty managed to capitalize on Iberian unrest and capture Barcelona in 801, only a few days after Christmas. The Franks established vassal states to protect the passes of the Pyrenees, Pamplona, Aragon, and Catalonia. Other areas of Spanish marches and Iberia pledged to the Carolingians, but only briefly. Many followed Count Borel II's example in 948, where he proclaimed that the Capet dynasty of France, which is one of the successors, I think the successor to the Carolingians, the Capet dynasty of France, was illegitimate and thus not bound by oath to them. Despite these small counties and kingdoms being generally too weak to launch offenses against the Muslims, the situation on incredibly advantageous terrain gave them an immense tactical advantage over any Muslim attacks on their borders, and so were relatively secure in this regard. So this is kind of a reoccurring thing. You see a lot of these Spanish kingdoms are able to endure attacks magnificently, but are generally too small to go on the offensive of themselves, and it seems that it's more of coalitions that get the job done. And I believe there's a battle coming up that is one such example, where it's not simply one Spanish kingdom fighting the Caliphate or the Emirate. It is a coalition of kingdoms and crusader forces. So, let's continue. The warfare continued, and alliances, peace, and lulls in fighting created gaps in territory and in the territory shift of the peninsula. Gradually, more and more kingdoms emerge, and technology changed to complement and amend the style and areas of warfare, like I said previously. While examining these changes may occur in this series to better explain the history of the Reconquista, this is a historical series and not strictly a political and military one. Here we go. Smarmy, even in my writing. The author encourages those interested to research these topics further, as he himself has, and as the subjects of these are of immense value in understanding the context of the series, and are furthermore interesting and entertaining. In sum, the Reconquista was generally continuous, but not always in the same place, in the same way, at the same time over the 780-year span. So without getting too specific, this would probably be the perfect time to elaborate on it, but more or less it's a difference of armor, it's a difference of arms, of warfare styles, of ways of rallying troops, developments of the feudal systems, and so on. It's a little nuanced. I would still encourage you to do it, because again, we could get really deep into the lore here, but it's already been 34 minutes, and It's already been 34 minutes, and we got the rest of this one and another one to get through. So let's keep going. One important and famous figure of this era is Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, commonly known as El Cid, who lived from 1043 to 1099. Who was a vassal knight, lord, and soldier of fortune. Great movie. I don't know if I mentioned it. Great movie starring Charlton Heston about El Cid's life. Very interesting fellow. And ironically, respected and followed by Muslims and Christians alike. Changed loyalties. It's a bit dubious in that regard, but interesting guy. I think, generally speaking, the Christian, I do talk about it. Well, so we'll just listen, eh? One important and famous figure of this area is Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, commonly known as El Cid, from 1043 to 1099, who was a vassal knight, lord, and soldier of fortune. His story shows the complex situation of politics during the Reconquista and the fractured nature of the Christian forces in Spain that so reflected the Christian experience in the Holy Land during and after the First Crusade. Another thing that's going on in this time period is the First Crusade. How to do one of those? I think I started one of the Northern Crusades. El Cid served Sancho II and expanded Christian territory by warring with the Muslims, but also fighting neighboring Christian territories under Sancho II's brothers, Alfonso VI and Garcia II. Sancho II was murdered in 1072, and his brother Alfonso VI assumed control of his territory, as Sancho II had no sons. Obviously not trusting one another, there was clear animosity between Rodrigo and Alfonso VI. Rodrigo would be exiled in 1080. El Cid became more or less a mercenary, fighting against Moor and Christian alike, and actually becoming employed by Muslims for a length of time. Alfonso VI eventually swallowed his pride and recalled Cid in 1087, mostly out of fear of El Cid's prowess, and as El Cid's prowess was unmatched, and the wars had been proceeding poorly for Alfonso VI and his kingdoms. El Cid naturally won victories for his lord, and turned his independent attention to Valencia, which was operating outside Alfonso VI's authority. It doesn't seem like I talk about it. There's a rather interesting anecdote, and I think, if memory serves, basically when Sancho is murdered, the suspicion naturally falls on Alfonso, as he is the one that gains the most. And I think they force him to swear on a Bible that he didn't kill him, but El Cid doesn't believe him, and that's what precipitates this turn to mercenary work. Could be wrong. That's worth looking up. That is worth looking up. There's a painting of it, I think, and it's talked about in the movie. Again, I'm running away with myself. Alright, so Valencia. After a protracted siege, El Cid's army captures the city in 1094 and carved out a principality nominally in service to Alfonso VI, but was largely outside of his control, managed directly by El Cid. Rodrigo warred constantly with the Almoravids, executing many of them with his capture of Valencia. He and his progeny would battle them and the rest of the Moors for many years. El Cid's story is far more complex and heroic, and can be easily learned about in a great deal elsewhere, or perhaps by watching the Charlton Heston movie, which takes some liberties of the same name. Also, if you are a fan of Age of Empires 2, there is an El Cid campaign, again, which takes liberties, but more or less is gonna get you the gist of his life. It was pretty good. It's a pretty fun game. I would definitely recommend it. Reconquista of this period saw not only great favorable shift in territories for the Christians, but also established the precedents of holy war. Several decades before, Blessed Pope Urban II called for crusade in the Holy Land. Many popes had interests in the Christian success in the region, and all of Christendom had interest in the success over Islam. Pope Alexander II even offered indulgences for certain missions in the Reconquista in 1064, an act that no doubt had bearing and inspiration for Blessed Pope Urban II at the Council of Clermont. At this council, as with many other areas in Europe, reconquistadores were finally reconciled with the conflict of peaceful pilgrimage and armed warfare. Knights errant in Europe had no problem now journeying to the Holy Land and the Levant to satisfy their obligation to God and Christendom. The Pope, however, had different plans for Spain, as he requested, and by some accounts insisted, that no Spaniard participate in the First Crusade, as their obligation was liberation of homeland from the infidel. Very interesting. Basically, the Pope saying, you can't go on crusade to the Holy Land. Why? Because you've got stuff at home to deal with. That's a very interesting concept, and I think that's worth maybe not delving into, because we might be beating a dead horse, but that's certainly worth taking note of. A lot of people talk about how certain political movements nowadays, certain religious movement nowadays, they think too broad. They think, how are we going to save the church? How are we going to save America? What can we do? What can we do? Well, basically, the precedent set by this Pope is you can look to your own home. You can look to your hometown. You can look to your community. Start a family. Raise them right. If you're too young to start a family, talk with your parents, talk with your siblings. Get your family involved in the faith. Your parish, your diocese, your city, your town, whatever. That's where it starts. It's kind of a grassroots idea that your loyalty is more towards your home than it is to the broader picture, if there are certain problems there. Which I think we can all agree, in this day and age, no one's perfect. And there's certainly room for improvement. Alright. We're on pace. 40 minutes. Looking at an hour. Part 3. Here we go. Reconquista. Part 3. Christianity Triumphant. Spoiler alert. 1095 through 1492. 1492? You do the Columbus check. With the defeat of the Almoravids in Valencia at the hands of El Cid, Muslim position in Iberia was weakened, though the Almoravids would battle back for many years. Christian infighting continued to hamper the progress of the Reconquista, much as how the rivalries in Christian kingdoms and the schism severely hampered the Crusades following the initial victory in the Holy Land. Hate to see it. Despite the similarities and exchange of territories amongst Christian kings and lords, the Reconquista continued a gradual march through Spain and Portugal, succeeding and seizing much of the Iberian Peninsula back for Christendom. This was aided in part by new chivalric orders, as well as occasional crusading forces on their way to the Holy Land, as evidenced by the capture of Tortosa by Crusaders in 1148 while on their way to join the Second Crusade. So yeah, basically as a detour, these guys are just like, you know what? Practice, fame, wealth, glory, God. They decided to either detour or on their way, they just said, you know what? Let's capture a couple Muslim cities, return them to Christendom. And it worked. It's pretty good. But, of course, there were obviously Crusaders that operated almost exclusively in Iberia. I believe we'll talk about them later. But yeah, there definitely are. So, don't be fooled that the Crusades were only in the Levant, because Iberia, basically, as I said before, the whole of the Reconquista is considered a crusade. As was, there were crusades in southern France, there's crusades against Lithuania, Livonia, and the Northern Crusades, which is definitely one I want to take a closer look at. I'd actually have to bang out that the written down portion of this before I can actually talk about it, because I'm a visual guy. As much as I like to talk off the cuff, when I talk about stuff like this, I like to have at least some sort of reference material with me. So I promise that'll come eventually if this is well received. And I'm definitely going to start playing with the format. Like I said, live stuff, call-ins, chats, all something that'll come in due course. Alright. By the opening of the 12th century, Muslim rule was generally held only to the southern part of Iberia, and soon faced factional fighting as well. Relatively speaking, the Muslims were fairly united up until this point. More or less. There was some, but the Christians were the ones that faced most of the infighting. But, again, Let's focus on the task in hand. The Almoravids were soon replaced as the dominant force in Iberia by the Almohad Caliphate, who started to carve out their own territory in North Africa, then gradually wresting control of areas in Iberia from their rivals and establishing full control of Morocco in 1147. This victory, coupled with the Portuguese and Crusader victory at Lisbon in the same year, effectively ended the Almoravids' influence and cemented the Almohad Caliphate as the ruler of Islamic Iberia. Following this success, the Almohads began to turn their attention northward to the Christian kingdoms of Spain and Portugal. In the years of their success, aided by Muslim distraction from Frankish invasions, ignorance of the strength of Christianity by Muslims, and factional infighting by the Muslims, the Christian kingdoms of Iberia had become very well organized and would not be easily defeated. I'm going to have to look here really quick because I would want to... I feel... Okay, good. I do talk about it. I feel guilty. I feel like most people talk about the Reconquista and they just completely ignore Portugal, which, with Our Lady of Fatima, which I was married on the anniversary of the Miracle of the Sun, October 13th, one of the promises was that the faith would never die in Portugal, I believe is the phrase. People overlook Portugal, especially in the Reconquista, and you gotta give them props. I remember studying history and geography when I was in grade school. And I basically thought, especially with the age of exploration, why on earth does this country exist? At the end, I didn't know what it was called, but basically, the Iberian Peninsula, you would assume that Spain would have complete control of it, but there's this weird, not even, the entire, from north to south, it doesn't even span that. Spain, completely surrounds it on three sides. What is Portugal? Basically, the Reconquista, and later when I do the 100 Years' War, and I'll talk briefly about the Portuguese succession, Portugal has a history. They're tenacious fighters. They earned their stripes. They earned the right to their kingdom, and we shouldn't ignore that. They were a major power. They deserved it. They're well fought, so I'm gonna give props. I've got a couple Portuguese followers out there. If they watch this video, even if I don't write it, know that I got nothing but respect for Portugal. They definitely have their own contributions to the Reconquista as a whole. Again, digressing. The Almohad force proceeded northward cautiously, however, and were encouraged by initial successes, such as the victory at the Battle of Alarcos, over the Kingdom of Castile in 1194. In 1212, Muhammad al-Nasir, the Caliph, met an alliance of 4 Christian kings arrayed against him in the Sierra Novena. Faced with such a terrifying and renewed aggressive advance by the Muslim, Pope Innocent III had called crusade against the Muslims in Europe. This united 4 rival kings: Alfonso VIII of Castile, Pedro II of Aragon, Sancho VII of Navarre, and Alfonso II of Portugal. There you go. Additionally, Leonese and French volunteers bolstered the Christian forces, as well as troops from the Order of Santiago, the Order of Calatrava, and the Knights Templar. Like I said, we would reference these guys, these these chivalric orders. So, like I said, this alliance, an alliance of multiple kingdoms, perhaps on their own, unable to defeat the Muslims, but they unite together, and these chivalric orders offering better trained, better equipped knights to help crush the Muslims. Despite all this, though, Christian forces only numbered around, the average is about 13,000, so 12 to 14,000, compared to a Muslim force of well over twice that size, approximately 30,000 men. The Almohad Empire was large and could afford to pull troops out of Africa for this invasion. So the Almohad camp was sheltered behind the mountains. On paper, the position was a sound one. However, an apparition of the great Isidore the Farmer, Saint Isidore the Farmer, a Spanish saint from the 11th and 12th century, revealed to King Alfonso VIII a presence of a hidden path that would allow him to surprise the Muslim army. You gotta love it. I love this story, and this is one of the reasons, apart from my birthday being on his feast day, that I picked Isidore the Farmer. If you don't know about Saint Isidore. He was married. His wife is also, I believe, a saint. He was a very poor farmer in Spain. Kind of like, he's in miracles of multiplication, similar to like a Saint Francis of Assisi type. Like, he was sowing fields, and he scattered like some grain for the birds, and people were like, oh, why are you doing that? And it turns out, like, miraculously, he still had enough grain to like accomplish, his toiling in the fields. I believe there was something else he did. He like, went to help someone or something, and I think he was attending mass or something like that, and people were like, you've got responsibilities. And when they looked out, his fields were being, sown and plowed by angels. Stuff like that. Really cool. Basically anyone who wants to live off the land, they really got to read about this saint. But, also being a student of history, interested in, historical warfare, this is a pretty cool story too. So, apparition of Isidore the Farmer, Saint Isidore the Farmer, appeared to Alfonso VIII, and basically told him a way that he could get around and surprise the Muslim army. Sure enough, a local farmer, Martin Alhaya, Martin Alhaya, led the Christian coalition through the, Despeñarperos Pass. Jeez Louise. Butchering these Spanish words, sorry. Earning him the hereditary title, the Cabeza de Vaca, which a descendant would carry with him to the New World, exploring and conquering forgotten king. Another interesting anecdote. Another guy, tracing his lineage back to this period, the Cabeza de Vaca, Spanish conquistador. The Christian forces emerged from the past and deployed against the Muslims. Taken completely by surprise, the Muslims were utterly routed and crushed. Hate to see it. The Christian losses were relatively light, though sadly several important leaders were injured or killed. The Muslim leader al-Nasir barely escaped, and his tent was sent to Pope Innocent III as a trophy. Not the first time you see that. I think they did that with the Battle of Vienna, too. The first half of the 13th century saw considerable victories for Christendom, in addition to this Battle of Navasti Tolosa, as it was soon to be called. Tolosa? The Caliph died shortly after the battle, and his offensive forces dissolved. Cadiz and Cordoba, a former Moorish capital, would fall to the Kingdom of Castile in 1236, delivering a crushing blow to Islamic Iberia. Several years later, Ferdinand III of Castile would besiege Seville for a year and a half, eventually forcing its surrender in 1248. A year later, the Kingdom of Portugal would end its own Reconquista when Alfonso III of Portugal seized Faro and left Granada as the sole Islamic entity in Iberia. The Emirate of Granada would hold out for several centuries, however, with only minor territorial exchanges for many years. Gradually, few territories were left to the Emirate. This was like a really interesting part when I read about it. Basically, what happened at the beginning was mirrored at the end. So, but obviously, like I said, mirrored. So it's in reverse. Basically, the Christian kingdoms got so powerful that they started more infighting, more territorial exchange, more consolidation. And so, even though they were on the verge of complete victory in Iberia, as I said in the 1200s? Yeah, the mid-1200s. Obviously, if anyone knows their history, it wasn't until 1492 that the Reconquista ended. So for 250 years, the Spanish are essentially faffing about, which obviously there's like interim wars, like I said, consolidation, intrigue, back and forth. But like, come on, 250 years, you can't buckle down and just win the damn thing? Despite small territory of Granada, near constant infighting over clan loyalties that undermined devotion to the emir, a weakened economy, the emirate endured. This was due in no small part to Christian conflicts over power and territory. Castile had long since emerged as a massive and powerful kingdom, absorbing Leon. Navarre and Aragon were the only two kingdoms in Spain remaining independent from Castile. This was soon to change. So in sum, basically, these Spanish kingdoms are just absorbing each other. which, as opposed to the coalitions that saw the major Spanish victories, now you're seeing, like, once they absorb each other, it's going to be, individual kingdoms that pretty much carry this out, more or less. Okay. Navarre and Aragon were the only two kingdoms in Spain to remain independent from Castile. This was soon to change. King Henry IV of Castile died in 1474, and his daughter Joanna was accused of being illegitimate, instigating the War of Castilian Succession between her and Henry IV's half-sister Isabella. It should sound familiar. Isabella had, in 1469, married the then Prince of Aragon, and now King of Aragon, Ferdinand II. Sound familiar? And so Aragon backed Isabella's claims. Joanna had married her uncle Alfonso V of Portugal. Married her uncle, King of Portugal. And so Portugal backed Joanna's claims. So you see a faction of Castile supporting Isabella, allied with Aragon, Ferdinand of Aragon, and the faction of Joanna in Castile, backed by Alfonso V of Portugal. France joined the hostilities, and as they were rivals with Aragon, lent their support with Portugal. Bad optics for French fans here. Bad optics. Ultimately, Isabella triumphed and became Queen of Castile. This effectively as a poorly written sentence. Basically, all of Spain except Navarre was under her control, and this created rivalry and hostility with Portugal, which would endure into the coming age of exploration. Portugal would, as an anecdote, credit where credit's due, Portugal definitely got things rolling first. Now, I know Spain funded the Columbus expedition, which found the New World. Portugal, under Henry the Navigator in the 1500s, they made a lot of progress, going around Africa, colonizing Africa, finding Japan, finding India. Ultimately the Spanish wanted a quicker route, but the Portuguese definitely got the ball rolling faster. And there was a lot of jealousy, a lot of animosity, because the Spanish, they just wanted what Portugal already had. Smaller country, more success. Hats off to the Portuguese. With this matter resolved, Ferdinand II and Isabella Ferdinand and Isabella, everyone knows them, turned their attention towards the Emirate of Granada. Muslims had taken advantage of the war, plaguing Christians, and launched raids, forcing settlements with the distracted Castilians. Settlements as in, not like the physical villages, settlements as in like concessions, political settlements. In 1481, a Muslim attack seized a Christian city and enslaved the populace. Ferdinand and Isabella deployed their forces and initiated the Granada War. It was not necessarily the intent of Christian forces to conquer all of Granada at that moment, but Muslim infighting, circumstances of the Christian leadership, and opportunistic generals caused Islam's hold of territories to fall at an incredible rate. Basically, it was a rotting structure, and once the Christians kicked down the door, the whole thing fell down. Malaga was the chief target for the Spanish, as it was a major seaport for Granada. In 1487, Ferdinand besieged it, and Muslim forces could not mobilize and effect resistance. Despite two generous offers, the town did not surrender, due in no small part to the stubbornness of the leader of the defense and the African defenders and Christian converts to Islam who feared their fate of surrender. Eventually, the commander asked to surrender, but Ferdinand refused. Think about that. And Ferdinand says, you know what, I'll give you two chances. They said no. So after a while, they said, well, actually, we might want to surrender. And then Ferdinand says, F that. And after taking the city, he severely punished the inhabitants with slavery, or in the case of the apostates, death by burning. Not the first time. Not the first time, won't be the last. So, alright, just making plans for my next stream, and we're good. The fall of this port sealed Granada's fate. Baza A major stronghold was besieged, and the Christians could make little headway. But Isabella soon arrived to bolster the morale of her leaders and troops, and the siege continued. 6 months after it began, the Muslim commander realized no relief was coming. The Christians were committed to holding the siege. Knowing this, he appealed to the Spanish, and the nearly unharmed defenders and the populace were given very merciful terms. I think we can assume that when Ferdinand II gave the generous offer to the previous city we just mentioned, judging by the treatment of Baza, is it? Yeah. Here, I think we can see that he was not lying. They were given very merciful terms, to the point where the Spanish now lacked only Granada, which a traitorous Muslim had. Basically, the Spanish were a little chafed at that, but you know what? Mercy is very important when you're trying to end a war quickly. I digress. The Spanish now only lacked Granada, which a traitorous Muslim had alleged vassal to Castile-Aragon had taken, and he had no intention of handing it over to the Christians, thinking he had gotten a raw deal. He rebelled against his lords and appealed to his fellow Muslims, but they all denied or ignored him for one reason or another. Poor dude, you hate to see it. The siege began on April of 1491, and proved to be a fairly short one. The inhabitants lacked the conviction to resist, and the Spanish were supremely confident in their ability to succeed. After about 8 months, the city capitulated, and the Treaty of Granada was drawn up and signed. The treaty was fairly generous to the capitulated city, once more, and the Spanish were elated to have a country unified under Christian rule. Initially, in 1492, eventually, in 1492 and 1502, the Spanish monarchy ordered Jews and Muslims in Spain to convert or leave in an effort to consolidate security and power in a country ransacked by almost 800 years of conflict. I told you we'd come back to this. 800 years of conflict. I think it's pretty safe to say that if you want your enemies gone, you have every right to say 800 years is enough. You either join us or you get out. The Spanish Inquisition would emerge. Told you we'd come back to it. To investigate heresy and false conversions. The Inquisition period would drive life in Spain after the Reconquista, as would the Age of Exploration of the New World by Columbus, commissioned by the Spanish monarchy in 1492. Spain would use the Inquisition to bolster their own faith and exploration and conquest to spread the true faith while bringing riches and glory back to the unified nations. That's that. I really hope you guys enjoyed that. This just, as I said, like a warm-up. I'll post this soon. Let me know feedback, anything. Let me know about volume. Let me know about posting. Let me know if you like kind of this format. Just give me some honest feedback. This is just kind of a trial run, so I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. This is Vassal Christ signing off.